America Open Market, AO Market. The best digital market for humanity is a free, multilingual, borderless market open to international sellers with various languages included. With America Open Market, you may start selling in minutes after filling out the form. Comprehensive dashboard where you understand your sales. Welcome to the Foreign Policy Review. I do not know why that commercial stopped in the middle, but I am Dustin Pickering, your host. Today we have Ben Toth, and he's going to be discussing NATO, European Union issues related to a Hungarian perspective. We have Billy Bob, and we have Ben Toth, and we have CARLO PARCELLI co-hosting. So Ben, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're coming from politically.
Hello, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. It's all intimidated by your stellar guests so far, and CARLO, who looks like a biking god. So I'm Ben. I'm a Hungarian UI UX designer by trade, which my mum says is I do widgets on screen, and that's perfectly reasonable. But on the other hand, I'm also a communist, and I create content mostly on Facebook. And throughout my life, it's basically been between a couple of worlds because I'm bilingual. That's why I sound like this. And I had a journey where around 10 years old, my history, everything in my history when communism failed in Hungary changed. And I didn't know who was telling the truth, and I hated being lied to. And after many books, many travels, I became a third generation communist after my granddad and myself. And I was perfectly content with that, with writing little essays from the history that they lie about, from Soviet history, from Hungarian history. And then February 24th this year happened, and the Western media went just mad with lies, confabulations, misuse of not just official narratives, but photographs from Syria, from all places. And that's when I knew I have to do something. And I started writing these basically media analysis posts between the different splinter-nets, the splinters of the internet, the Russian sphere, the Western sphere, there's the Arab sphere and the Chinese sphere now, and they have no relation. And I thought, in order to stay sane, I have to find the truth and I have to keep learning. And it turns out a lot of other people wanted that too. So just like your show, I'm a dissident voice, I suppose.
Ben, thank you so much. We're really honored to have you on and that you have agreed to come on. I know you would like to get into more of the video format, and so we're thankful that you agreed to come on our show and get your feet wet. We talked before the show. I mean, I don't think you have any reason to be shy. I think you need to go for it because you're pretty impressive. How many languages do you speak exactly?
My mother tongues basically are English and Hungarian. Those are perfect, but I dabble in a bit of German, a bit of French, but having trouble learning Russian, which really everybody should nowadays.
Your English is impeccable. It's way better than ours, and we only speak English. That seems typical of a lot of Europeans. But it's just our pleasure to have you. We want to get into the subject matter.
Right. Why don't we start with some of the Western views of Orban? Like, what is the discrepancy between what is being presented to, say, us in the United States, as we discussed a little bit before the show, and what is actually the truth? I mean, from your perspective and what you've experienced there in Hungary.
Sure. I think with Orban, we can go back maybe a year, because even then he was the bad boy of Europe. He very often was called Adolf, or the Hitler of Europe. That was the hysteric EU press. I'm not sure about the Hungarian press. You would know better, but it is presented in Western Europe as we call it illiberal democracy. They call it an autocracy. There's rampant corruption, apparently, which is proto-fascism. Women are not safe. My freedom of speech that I am practicing with you is not safe. That's the image, basically, in the West. And to me, he's just a guy. I was pretty much, since my country of birth fell in 1989, I really, really dislike this man. But I don't fall into the trap. Something similar happened in Hungary that happened in America with Trump and Biden. Either one is the angel, the archangel, or the devil. That's how most Hungarians think. So Orban is either Christ or he is the absolute enemy. That's the local perception of it. I do it a bit more nuanced. I give him very much credit when he does something right in the interests of our people, and I absolutely scold him when he does something terrible, and he's done both. But he's not an autocrat. This is not a fascist regime. This is a right-wing conservative, especially socially conservative government. Yeah, so because it's a bourgeois democracy, that we have our little, if they're friendly, I suppose we call them millionaires, billionaires who do lots of charity. If they're enemies, then we call them oligarchs. We have those. They wash each other's hands. They're in there all together. The other side also has that. But it's just a normal European country that, since February at least, has found its voice, found a way to just go for sovereignty, just say no to all of this absolute madness, that both the sanctions and the fervor for hating everything Russian, culturally, everything. We just said no to that, and I'm really glad we did. That's Orban, I think, in a nutshell. He's neither saint, neither the devil.
Well, the elephant in the room certainly is Ukraine, and it's shitting all over Europe. I noticed in your blog the other day, this is very interesting, and I'd like you to comment on it. Hungary has won a months-long standoff with the EU about the frozen funds the organization owes our people in government, but held back on democratic backslide grounds. There's a legal term for you. All too familiar to our Polish brothers before their government went war mad. And what was interesting about the fact that Orban was able to pry a good percentage of those funds, ostensibly from the EU, by saying, "Look, if you're not going to, if you're not," he probably didn't say this. I'm not voting for the Ukraine military money. If what, and then van der Leyen probably said, well, "What can we do to get you to do this?" They can say, "Well, give me my people my money. Give me the money you owe us." And of course, the EU bowed to it, thought they had the deal done, thought they had the unanimity they need, and then we learned in the last couple of days that Poland has stepped up now and has done the same thing. They've said one of the four aspects of the agreement they don't agree with. It's a 15% maximum tax on, or is it minimum tax? Excuse me, on transnational corporations. We just don't agree with that, and I think they're just looking to get a piece of their money back. So I'd like you to just basically comment on whether or not you think, under these conditions and many other occurrences have happened, if the EU and NATO have a future, or whether or not they'll break up. We had Regis Tremblay on last week, and he definitely is of the mind that it's falling apart. So I'd like to get your opinion on it in general.
That's a couple of questions. So maybe let's start with the beginning. Poland doing the game like fantastically. I think I would sum it up as they tasted blood in the water, because Hungary, the illiberal democracy, now Putin's man in Hungary, that's what Orban is called, actually got his way and got some cash, which is needed because we are not immune from the crisis in the economy, energy crisis, the inflation. We are not immune. We really need it. And we have been owed that since the beginning of the health scare that we won't name. So at least we got some of it. And Poland said, "Oh, you get that." I don't know if you remember or you've been told, but they actually wanted reparations from the Germans to the tune of 1.2 or 1.3 trillion for events been back in the war. That was already sensing weakness. They are absolutely doing the same. But what's interesting is we are brother countries. Both have this saying, the Hungarian is Polski, Magyar barát, Pole, Hungarian are friends. We even share the word you probably know, which is kurva. So we've been historically friends. But the moment everything blew off, they went war mad and we went peace mad. So we are on opposite scales of that. But we really, really both currently hate the EU. And that's something that unites us. And in a weird dance of the periphery states, we managed to win a few, which isn't usually the case. There is another thing I'll inject here, which I not sure it was meant for the Poles, but someone else, when Ursula von der Leyen, the wicked witch of the EU, said, if certain country, sorry, I can't, it's not in my head right now, votes the wrong way, we have tools to handle that situation, meaning it's very, very much a uniform block. You either with us 100%, or we have tools to undermine you with money, with bribes, with turning off of funds. And I think that's what's going to be the end. I see especially a north-southern divide in the Union, which could break it, because I'm sure I remember during the Syrian crisis, I think the number is 6.7 million immigrants fled that area. And they came north through the Balkans, Hungary, our Western neighbors, the previous Yugoslavia, and we were the ones to stop that. Before that, in Turkey, there is still, this is according to the UN, more than half of those people are still in Turkey. So Turkey controls those people, and that's what Europe doesn't want. Even Italy and France are at odds with each other, like from immigrants from just a single boat. They got into a row with that. So there's definitely, the contradictions go back years and years, but they are coming to a fore. And I'm not sure that the EU will live longer than me at this point.
So you're not talking about an imminent collapse within a year or two. You're just thinking over a decade or so, or let's say over 5 decades, because you're young. You look very young. Over like 5 decades,
Thank you.
it's going to start crumbling and then eventually just dissolve itself. Now, what about all the Ukrainian immigrants? Is that causing more? Is it similar to the Syrian immigrants that's just causing stress and tension within the EU countries?
I can only speak for PH, my hometown. I think in Budapest they are causing issues, but I've read in British media, also the little Baltic midgets. I think it was Medvedev who called them political gnomes, which is a phrase I love. They are having huge issues, but the heart of Germany, this is important to understand, the heart of the EU has always been Germany. There's a reason that the central bank is in Frankfurt, not in Brussels. So the German industry, which has tentacles in Hungary, has tentacles elsewhere, carrying capital out of these countries, is the main engine. And since that was premised on 3 things, cheap Russian energy, huge Chinese markets, access to them, and like unfettered access to African raw resources, basically 2 of those 3 things are gone. They are going like down, and everybody around them is asking, what happens to us next? How do we make it through this? Who are our friends? Where can we get access to the same sorts of things? If it's 10 times more expensive, I think the number is 8 times more expensive than Russian pipeline gas and 4 times more expensive than American LNG prices to ship them all over here. 4 times more expensive to start your manufacturing line in a BMW plant. How is that going to remain competitive? How's that going to compete with the huge Chinese automobile market? And if that goes down, they have stopped a lot of them. Aluminium production, a lot of this in Germany has stopped. People are going to furlough. How is that economically viable in the future? And everybody now, it's everyone for themselves. What happens to us? What happens to us in 2 years, in 4 years? What's the future viability? And that's how the cracks are shaping, not to mention NATO, which is another beast.
But the alternative is far worse, Ben. The alternative of being friends with Putin is way, way, way worse than total economic collapse. You have to understand that.
Absolutely. He is the devil. He eats babies. He's I think, an orc from J.R. Tolkien's words. And he also has like 5 or 7 diseases. He has cancers, numerous clones. There's a robot.
Also the richest person in the world. Richest person in the world, too.
You know how they calculate that. That was surprising to me when I first found it.
I'm pretty sure they just say that he owns all the natural resources in Russia. So.
Yeah, Gazprom, Rosneft, all the government industries are his personal property. That's how he's the big bad Vlad, is what I like to call him.
I think it would be good to remind our viewers that this collapse of Europe is actually the way the United States wanted it in 1993 when they put out their paper, The Project for the New American Century, from Bill Kristol and Victoria Nuland's husband, Kaplan, whatever his name is, and other notable people. One of my former customers, Richard, what's his name, Pearl, who did very well with with Iraqi oil, by the way, and Kurdish oil. But anyway, in that document, they say that 446 million European consumers is not permissible. We have to weaken Europe because it will become the economic juggernaut if the EU succeeds. And so Ukraine is sort of a real gift to the US in more than just selling arms getting arms from the military industrial complex to make fortunes overseas and that sort of thing. It's actually a mode for making Europe more subservient, and I think that's what you're seeing now. Would you agree with that, Ben?
Now I would. When the special military operations started, I thought they were just untrained and stupid to initiate the sanctions war on a massive energy producer, massive raw materials place. It's a juggernaut. Russia is a juggernaut. I thought they really thought that the ruble would be rubble, the economy would just collapse, Putin would be out in 2 weeks. I think they really believed that. And they saw after a couple of rounds of sanctions that it wouldn't work. Well, there's no backpedal. But when they saw that, I think maybe that's when they said, let's blow Nord Stream 2. And that's when it was obvious, Nord Stream 1 and 2, obvious to everyone that I think it was Lord Ismay, a British aristocratic general, the first Secretary General of NATO, who said, the goal of this organization is to keep the Americans in, the Germans down, and the Russians out, maybe in a different order than that. And that was obvious. And what was amazing to me, that Scholz, who really looks like the snowman from Frozen, which is even more, Olaf, he stood next to Joe Biden, your president. And when he said, we have ways, we're just going to destroy there's not going to be any Nord Stream, he just stood there and nodded. He was complete. I have never seen someone be that humiliated like Olaf Scholz was in Washington. And now we have Macron, because he's unsatisfied with the high energy costs and also the Inflation Reduction Act, which is exporting US inflation to everywhere, and also harvesting European industries, getting them to move to America. He went to the White House, he had a lovely ice cream dinner, ostriches and all that, and then he was told to smile, shut up, go home, you can't do anything. So they really are not in the position to resist any of this. Later, no, I think it was before, when the words came all from Emmanuel Macron also, that the age of abundance is over. The same time that I think Habeck, the energy minister of Germany, said that the economic model of Germany that has worked for the last 30 years is over, it's done. And they realized that it's just not going to go the way it has before. But I think I lost my track of thought beginning with the question. Sorry, I do that.
Well, that's where let them eat the bugs. They will eat the bugs. That's my German accent. It's not very good, but yeah, you won't own anything, and you'll be happy, and you will eat bugs, and you will have all the nutrition you could ever want. Yeah, I don't know how that would be acceptable for the German working class that's had pretty good living standards for the past several decades, but hopefully. They can do something. Hopefully they're not as disenfranchised as, U.S. citizens seem to be.
And I'm curious, like you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act and how it exported inflation to the rest of the world. I wonder if you could go into some details about that. I'm just curious.
Oh, I'm uncredentialed, so I don't have real financial, like some of your guests. But from what I understand, like from people like Michael Hudson, who is the best economist, I'd say, in the world, is the United States is starting to face troubles. And the moment it raised its interest rates, all the other people who need to buy energy because of the petrodollar agreement in the 70s, who need to buy energy, they are going to do exactly the same. And as a result, their currency will deflate compared to the dollar, which is what we've been seeing. Also with the euro, people say it's stable. It's not, it's going down, but the Hungarian forint is going further down. So it's just failing towards each other, while, as we all know, the best performing currency of the year, I'm sure I don't need to tell you, is the ruble. So that's the aspect of it. There's two harvestings going on, because please come to us. We have stable energy, not 4 times the price. Come open a BMW factory in the in the US. for example. And the other one is trying to harness Chinese high-tech sector, which they're very, very unhappy about, via, I think it's called the Chips 4 Alliance, where the traditional colonies of, what do you call it? The south of the peninsula where the north is free. I'm sorry.
South Korea.
Yeah, South Korea, Japan, and the island province of Taiwan, which is another story altogether. Just bring all your semiconductor industries, your microchip, the fab factories all the way to us. And they're having a lot of issue with that because apparently those chips are going to be twice, 3 times the price if they're made in America. But that's the desperate move America is making right now. It doesn't matter. Europe can be a smoldering ruin, but we are gonna. There's no alternative, which is, I think, that was the meaning of the Nord Stream attacks. And I'm just going to say one more word about that. That it's hilarious that I think the Swedes investigated it underwater, and after months and months and months, they concluded that phase 1 of the investigation is complete, and we know it was sabotage. That's all we know. We don't know who.
Right.
That's all we know.
So how can we support you as a as a person right now during this time of where there's all this deflation and so forth going on? How can we support you financially if someone, say, viewing right now wanted to send you a little extra cash?
Oh, thank you very much. My Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, both those links end with my name, which you could see here as one word, but without the funny O. So it's Patreon/Bentoth and buymeacoffee.com/Bentoth.
Excellent. Do we have any more questions? We have about 8 minutes till break.
Okay, go ahead.
No. It's not a question so much. Actually, it's a question more for Dustin and Billy Bob to feed back to our audience. I know here at the CIA here in Washington, they have a directive of sadism. It's run by a man named Marquis de Sade, and it's on the 5th basement level. And one of the things they practice is economic sadism, and the kind they're practicing on Europe right now. And I'm wondering if what they want to do is see how much a comparable economic level, that was European economic level, can be pushed to also see how far that they can now lead, to borrow a term from Hayek, lead down the road to serfdom the American people, and put the screws to them. And what the question I would have for Billy Bob and Dustin, and feel free to jump in, Ben, is what have you seen in the last 10 months, 9 or 10 months, in where you live in Houston, Dustin, and where you live in Billy Bob in California? What have you seen that anecdotally, the crunch that's happened on your bills and bills of people around you and that sort of thing?
Dustin, you want to start? How's Houston treating you?
Well, food prices have gone up a little bit, gas prices, but the gas prices are sort of stabilizing. I think here, Texas is a big oil, so it's like, Houston especially, banking and oil. I think mostly I've seen it in food prices going up slightly, some of them going up, $2 or $3 for something, going up a couple of dollars. It's hard to really say because I don't get out too much other than to go buy groceries, and I just kind of observe society as a whole. I think this following COVID, I think people have become skittish and they're not willing to go out as much. And I think that's also part of this, this economic downturn has really fed into that fear that people have. I feel like there's like a dark cloud hanging over a lot of places,
Yeah, I don't think we've hit the worst of it yet. I mean, I think we're only at the beginning, but definitely there's inflation, and the inflation that I see in the supermarket is a lot worse than the inflation on the books that the news tells us about. Also, homeless. Like, I mean, COVID probably caused a lot of that too, but I've seen just a big increase in the amount of tents going up, under freeways, under overpasses. And I like to ride my bike around. And so, when I'm just doing my normal route, like, wow, there's a lot more, homeless people. So yeah, I mean, you can't quantify it, but things are definitely going in the wrong direction without a doubt, and I think it's only starting to go in the wrong direction. I'm curious about Ben's thoughts on whether or not the West. It seems like there's definitely factions within the West that want to escalate. Factions with so Carlo, did we get closure on that? Are you okay with?
Yeah, I don't think it's worth pursuing any further.
Well,
I,
shoot.
I'd like to jump in with a quick question to Carlo though. Did
Oh,
you
yeah,
in the
I
beginning?
apologize for changing the subject. Go ahead, Ben. I'm sorry.
No, we'll get back to that. But did
Okay,
you say
okay.
Marquis de Sade at the beginning of your question? Wasn't he the royal who was in the Bastille while it was stormed and he was shouting profanities out the window? Wasn't that Marquis de Sade historically?
That was him. They don't understand the true nature of the Marquis and down at the Langley. They just like the association.
Okay.
Because they love
Facade and
torture. I mean, we
sadism.
saw that with Abu Ghraib and
Mhm.
that sort of thing. So they're
I'm
happy.
wondering, Carlo, was that satire you were applying there, or was that?
Yeah. Of
serious?
course, I'm
I'm just checking. Just checking.
Of course,
If they
there's
really
no.
have a Desaad, in a bank room somewhere in the back room,
No, they wouldn't call it.
they wouldn't call it that.
The directive
call it
of
the realm of
sadism. They would call it
fucking the world.
the directive of milk and honey or something ironic. But I don't know. It was just something I wanted to throw out there.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
Sorry, back to you, Billy Bob.
Well, no, I forgot that Carlo probably wanted to follow up, and I wanted to jump to something else. But
Nah.
we're gonna move. Sorry, Carlo. We'll move on.
So we have about 3 minutes to commercial break.
And that was a question on my mind before Carlo asked his, and I didn't want to forget it. But just it seems like there's provocations that are being launched against Russia and China, and it seems like there's a certain segment, at least, of the empire that's hoping to get a strong reaction. And I'm thinking that's in order to justify an even stronger reaction from the West, to escalate. And I can't imagine why the West wants to escalate. But what are your thoughts on what is in the interest of the West, and why does it seem like they want to escalate into a wider war? Why they want to start a war with China right now when they have their hands full with Russia? Because it seems like the things they're doing are calculated to do that. And to me, it's like, is that really in your interest? So I'm wondering your thoughts, Ben. I mean,
So you kind of throw the dice and see what happens, sort of situation.
With 2 minutes till break, I think I'm going to answer part of your question, which is escalation. I will then divide it between Russia and China. But the escalation factor, I think it's a tiny minority, like Victoria Nuland, like Antony Blinken, especially Michael McFaul when it comes to Russia, who want to see something, which is why the Russians have prioritized what they call escalation management. They are not going to use nukes. They've said it many times. They are not going to do anything else. But in reality is in the military, including Stoltenberg, including the military leaders of NATO, including the military leaders increasingly in the United States, they don't. They have been spooked because they don't have the manpower. They increasingly, many people say, but they don't have the weapons. Europe has ran out of weapons from one NATO person, not just Stoltenberg himself, up to the other, and they don't have the production lines that have been going 24 hours a day in Russia. So I don't think there's a huge amount of these crazy people. Like, there's proper military people who are responsible, who knows, no, we can't face this, man. I mean, 300,000 that's what was the latest limited mobilization in Russia. That's pretty much confirmed to be close to 500. 460 is the latest I've heard that is concrete that's going there. With the latest gadgets, you can see trains that just don't end for 10 minutes. All of that is going there. There is no NATO answer. So sending in a couple of Patriot missiles with $3 million to $6 million a single rocket to shoot down $15,000 drones, that's not an answer. That's not going to change anything on the ground. As for the divide, I know in America that Republicans hate China and the Democrats hate Russia is a pretty accurate divide. And I have no idea that particular struggle, who would win, and why they are doing both at the same time is just beyond me, because China is Russia times 15. Like, it's just visit a factory in China. I haven't, but I've looked at tours from people who lived there for 15 minutes. it's like nothing I've seen in my entire life. It's not like a little factory block, it's a city.
We're going to take a brief break. I invite our viewers to subscribe to the channel. This is the Foreign Policy Review. Thanks for viewing. We'll be right
In a
back.
world where the quality of information available to poorer communities is doctored, tainted, and sometimes regressive, where the words fake news have come to mean other people's opinions, it is vital to rely on news platforms with journalists who have feet on the ground and can report the truth. New York Parrot, a New York-based national and global news outlet, is changing the narratives of media operations. We focus on the news that matters, like self-empowerment, entrepreneurship, finances, health, security, politics, and more. We strive to curb violence, racial and economic discrimination, and to promote peace and socio-economic development of multiculturally diverse world. As we give voice to the people, we also give your business a voice and make it heard. Get your products and services off the ground by advertising on our fast-growing platform. With so much of daily visits to New York Parrot, you can't afford to be invisible to prospective clients on the website they trust the most. Our posts reach millions of people across the New York State and around the world. Advertising on our new site will unlock an audience of thousands of potential customers on your doorstep. New York Parrot is born to prosperously speak tomorrow for the voiceless.
So I'd like to follow up.
Thank you so much. Well, let's just jump right back in. We have plenty of extra time here, so let's go for it.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up with Ben's answer to that last question. I mean, so it seems like he's describing kind of, a small minority of crazies within the ruling establishment, the ruling Western establishment, that are looking for an opportunity to create some kind of momentum that is irreversible. You know, if they can get some kind of a reaction from Russia or China, then they'll, we'll get to a situation that will lead in the direction that their crazy minds want to take us. Whereas you have adults in the room at the Pentagon, in NATO leadership that would normally want to resist that. The facts on the ground might be so compelling that they wouldn't be able to resist things snowballing in the wrong direction. So it is weird, it's not a monolith. Like the ruling Western establishment isn't a monolith. You have different competing factions vying for power and influence and to get things going how they ideologically want them to go. And that's, I mean, I think that's a good way to conceive of what's going on. It's not like you have just one center of power that dictates to everybody. It doesn't work that neatly.
Right.
I completely agree. Yeah, that is a best way to analyze it, because it's never been that way, and it was very rarely out in the open. Like, the Silicon Valley millionaires are very much at odds with the oil billionaires in America. And then there's different factions within those as well. And they have little fights, usually in closed rooms. But there's one crucial difference now, which is everybody knows is the WEF. But that's not monolithic either. That is a European project to, well, maybe not go into the details. But what is important is it's just another court, and it's public. It's an opinion sharing mechanism between countries that enforces this and that. And it's not alone. It's at odds with other parties, other parts of.
And that's Klaus Schwab's thing?
Yes, the bugs man himself, Mr. Klaus Schwab, and also, interestingly, Mr. von der Leyen, Miss von der Leyen, to say, who actually spent 4 years in Stanford, USA, and basically before he became, the Board of Trustees of the World Economic Forum. So she is their voice in Europe, the main one. But as you can tell, there are many different voices as well. For example, Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz both said, we should take into consideration Russia's security guarantees after all this. And for this, the European Union investigated Macron's latest election and his campaign offices looking for corruption. I mean, that's your answer, just to trying to be a bit reconciliatory, a bit friendly towards Russia. I mean, You remember this happened to Yanukovych. Yanukovych wanted to be friendly with both East and West, and he had to go. Nuland swooped in. We both listened to the phone call, and that was done. That's it. That's how the European bloc is very much US controlled. And I want to share something that I recently learned, and it shocks me because it's in continental Europe. And there is this guy. Let me show you the ambassador, permanent ambassador to the EU, currently Mark Gittenstein. I've never heard of him before. He was previously Obama's appointed ambassador to Romania. So he stirred trouble there. And he has a US mission, and I'm reading the official readout here. Is home to some 100 employees representing the the Department of State, as well as the Department of Commerce, Agriculture, Homeland Security, Justice and Treasury, the Agency for International Development, and the US office to the US Trade Representative. Why do they have a say, and a very strong say, in Europe? I mean, I thought every European would be outraged to just learn this, but that is very much the structure of the European Union, and dissent, as we have been learning, and both the Poles and us, is punished.
Well, it sounds like they've got IMF loans or something, where part of the agreement is what the standard IMF loan is that you have U.S. representatives controlling your banking system in your country or something like that. But I have another. I can't answer that. That's the first I've heard of that particular thing. But I really would like to get to the Serbia and Kosovo situation too. It's another instance of arm twisting. This time the Serbian arm, which is already a couple of times been twisted to the point of being broken off. But could you comment on that?
Please stop me if I ramble on too long, because this is close to my heart, and a lot of within the communist circles, there's a lot of splitting and disagreements. Well, we're about to learn, because the Russians don't like when I speak of Yugoslavia, but we cannot talk about Kosovo without first talking about Yugoslavia, which
Absolutely.
was born from the ashes of World War II, or the Great Patriotic War. And it was one of the rare countries that was built on an idea. And that idea was bratstva I jedinstva, a brotherhood and unity of the 6 different people within that cauldron. And they said, we're weak, we're divided. What if we acted all together? We could become strong, independent, and we could develop without the imperialists interfering here or there. And they built, I think, something beautiful. Now, they were led by this guy, Josip Broz Tito. And this is where I get bad vibes from the Russians. He was one of the great socialist leaders. I will always say that. And he was in the command of an anti-fascist battalion in the Spanish Civil War. And then he went home. He was the leader of the Partizani, the partisan movement, which held up different regiments of the Wehrmacht single-handedly, which was an amazing feat way before the Red Army got there. So he was larger than life, one of the big guys. He was Deng Xiaoping before his time, because he created a special socialism. Socialism with Yugoslav colors is how I put it. And he was the embodiment of the idea aforementioned, because, and this is interesting also, he was, sorry, I'm cheating because I have this little cheat sheet with me. He was a Slovene Croat, and he led the country from Belgrade, the historic capital of Serbia. And his wife, Jovanka, I'm not going to butcher her second name because it's complex, was a Serb from Lika, Croatia, exactly like Nikola Tesla, the high-powered Serb, the inventor, you know. So within them, it was made manifest, this idea, and by almost sheer force of will, they held this country together. And just to get into a little bit of stats of how everything worked there, was the greatest growth rates in all economic and social indicators after the war, even better than Hungary, and ours was remarkable. You had guaranteed jobs, guaranteed 1 month vacation, free healthcare, education, obviously, because it was all government run. The life expectancy went to 75 years, literacy jumped to 99%, and most of the economy was public, not for profit. They did have markets, controlled markets, but that's where the critics come in, especially UK MI5 analysts who want to attack them, that, oh, they weren't really socialist, because they didn't go either way. They didn't go with Moscow. They didn't go with Washington. They played both of them a little bit. They got, this is apocryphal, but they got the latest tanks from the Russians and they sent them to Washington. Then they got the latest jets from NATO and they sent that to Moscow. They did this game as long as they could. But then the fall came, and I have to talk about that. I'd like to plug a movie, if I may, or the best Yugoslav movie I've ever seen when I went to my Slovene friends to talk about this, and it's called Lepa Sela, Lepo Gore, or Pretty Village, Pretty Flame. It's free on YouTube and other things. I watched it with English subtitles. And it begins with this foreboding image of a brand new Yugoslav tunnel, and there's this ribbon cutting ceremony, and a finger is cut, and there's blood. And that becomes a theme in the movie, but later it gets into the story of many people, but mostly an undying friendship of two young people. And they were called Milan, a Serbian fellow, and Halil, who is his Bosniak Muslim friend. But they didn't notice this. They were together. They watched the girls from the bushes, and they were afraid of the tunnel because there was ogres in that tunnel. And they started a little mechanics garage together, and then the war came. And there are other people in that, like an innocent smuggler, a doctor who didn't want to be there, a big Titoist, like proper communist leader, all of these, and they fight. And it ends with a scene which I will never forget when they are standing near that tunnel, and one asks, did you kill my mother? I didn't. Did you burn down our garage? I didn't. Well, who did then? Was it the ogre in the tunnel? Did he kill everything here? And that to me is the tragedy of the Bosniak War, which basically led to the split up. This was years before Clinton bombed Belgrade, but that led to the split up of, for me, will always be a beautiful nation that people loved. And that's where I'm going to borrow a little bit from the great George Galloway, who said Bush House in London had the BBC World Service broadcast in the 6 languages. Since the end of the war, the 6 languages of Yugoslavia, right into Yugoslavia, all these messages. They weren't interested in Slovene culture or knitting or the well-being of the people. They wanted it split, destroyed, and to reintroduce the serpent, this is his words, of separatism and ethno-nationalism. And that is exactly the tragedy that happened to them. Now, the 6 people did not include Albania. So this was years later. Yugoslavia is dead, but Serbia is still a socialist state and still stands. And the Albanian Muslims start moving into this land, which we now call Kosovo, to do their caliphate. And you wouldn't be surprised to learn that there was US and Wahhabi Saudi influence in this as well, and they wanted to declare this. And even to this day, that area is legally Serbia. There has been no resolutions, which brings very interesting thoughts to the minds of the Serbs now that the 4 oblasts in Ukraine have actually voted to become Russia. So, and then everybody screamed, you can't redraw the lines of a country. Well, you did it in Kosovo, and it's still not. There's 5 European Union countries that do not acknowledge the existence of Kosovo. And to add, well, actually, let's go a little bit forward to Clinton's bombing, because Serbia is the most, you have to understand this, the most pro-Russia people on the face of the earth. Beginning of the special military operations, they had these huge protests with the Russian flag, with Z everywhere. They still have those Zs. I mean, they are not going to be backing down, which is why Vučić has to maneuver very carefully, because there's public opinion there and he cannot break it. And they remember, because there are buildings in Belgrade which was bombed for almost 3 months straight by NATO, the defensive alliance, and every single Serb alive today saw it or knows someone that was alive then, and they will not budge. So if NATO actually wants, let's say NATO, EU, the US, wants a conflict there, I would not like that to happen. I detest bloodshed, but it is something they will never, ever win. I have no doubt about that. If you meet a couple of Serbs, you will know what I'm talking about. They will never win. They just abhor NATO, and there's no way that can happen. By the way, just book recommendation. Everybody here knows it, but Michael Parenti's To Kill a Nation, The Attack on Yugoslavia is just excellent reading to those who may not have heard it.
I read a statistic yesterday that Kosovo is 20% U.S. military base.
Yeah, it wasn't declared like a country, but now the EU is actually inviting it as a candidate country, which just blows my mind. But it basically has barely any people left. They have become gastarbeiterns in the West, which is, they floated out. It is a barracks. It is a NATO protectorate. That's pretty much the function of it. That's all. It's there to cause trouble to Serbia should Serbia do something wrong. And they did, because they didn't sanction Russia. And that comes from, I think it was it the Dutch Parliament? The Dutch Parliament, I think, voted for emergency powers to punish Serbia in case Serbia still refuses to sanction Russia, which is something they can't do.
What I find almost unbelievable is how any country in the world, and this includes the countries of Europe, would trust the United States at this point. In particular, Hungary, after what Hungary did to, what the U.S. did to Hungary in 1956 during the Hungarian Revolution, so-called Hungarian Revolution, where they just left the people out to dry. I mean, they just left them at the mercy of the Soviet forces. If I can view it that way, why would I just don't understand? I think it has more to do with power and money than it does with any kind of level of genuine trust that the U.S. will even prevail in say the current situation in Ukraine. I think it has more to do with an elite that really runs things, that sees advantage to themselves and the people around them rather than to the general populations. I think there are very few people that are concerned with their own populations, and when they step forward, as Orban does to a certain extent, they're isolated, and as it is with, say, with Nicaragua or Venezuela or Cuba, when they step forward with a nationalist perspective, or when Ethiopia and Eritrea come to terms. When it's not in the U.S. interest, then there's always people put in place in Europe that will, or in anywhere in the world, that whether it be the Tigrays or the what's the name of the newspaper family in Nicaragua, that they will, because they're so attached to the U.S.'s extraordinary power and wealth, that they won't even look at reality as an option, just their own personal aggrandizement. And could you comment on how the Hungarians say, basically, is the 1956 revolution still in their minds and their consciousnesses?
Well, it's been 30 years right now of a huge re-education campaign of the Hungarian psyche. So every year in October, when they go up to the castle, when they held their little rallies, they talk about the failed freedom fighters and our chance to be democratic again, and all those lies. My granddad was in Budapest in 1956. He was a member of Munkásőrs, which are worker guards, and he saw with his own eyes the kind of people, the same people you have in Banderastan to the east. They were there with the tattoos, and they strung people from lampposts, communist and Jewish faith people. That is the type of crowd that gathered there. There were some innocents, obviously, who just wanted blue jeans and Coca-Cola, and freedom was about to come to us and all that. But thank goodness that Kardar was there and our Soviet friends were there. Unfortunately, it broke the left movement around the world and in Hungary, because they managed to frame it through the media as the tanks. Look at the oppressive Russians, and that's how we became known as tankies, people who support the events. And then there's a lukewarm social democrats on the other side who said, no, this is just brutal and totalitarian. Even the left itself broke. But fast forward to 1990, and we are, in my memories, in the words from the television, we are approaching the beautiful West, our sophisticated family in Europe. We're rejoining them after Eastern regression. And back then, we had huge working factories, pristine roads and all that. So did America. So I thought, well, one day America was just shiny. The neon lights, basically, Las Vegas, that was the dream with sports cars. That was the dream sold to us through Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. It was already broadcast in 1956, which was a dress rehearsal for 1990. But a lot of people for 30 years have heard nothing else. A lot of people don't have parents or grandparents who lived under the system. But when I talk to them, And I asked them, be honest, or your grandma, if you've talked to them, be honest. Was it better? Most of them say, God damn it, yes, it was. Because now our factories are closed and decaying. Our roads look like American roads. So in a way, we have caught up, it seems, but not the way we expected. But you don't, what I'm just meaning to say is don't dismiss the enormous media campaign and Orban was a huge part of this. Everything Soviet, everything from the People's Republic is evil. And by extension, anything Russian is evil. That's ingrained in so many people that right now it's very difficult for us politically to hedge even a little bit to the east. And that's why they call him hilariously, he is the ruble right wing. And then there is the dollar left wing, which are, these were born in the last 3 months, these slang terms.
And they confuse, social issues, where he's definitely a social conservative, with economic issues, power issues. Carlo was describing a class of elites that don't have loyalty to their people, but have loyalty to their class. I mean, what a concept, right? I mean, I think that's essentially what's going on, and that's the struggle between, it's the working class struggling against the capitalist class. But most people in the West, they've been indoctrinated to ignore the reality of oppositional class interests, ignore the reality of class struggle, and this has a real detrimental effect on their ability to analyze, exactly what's going on. But that's the state. That's the victory of the soft power of the propaganda machine of the capitalist class. Like they've really done well with their propaganda apparatus, and people are just, they're confused about what their own best interest is, and they follow these other narratives that aren't reality based. Sorry, Carlo, I'm diatribing.
No, that's all right. I just wanted to mention back in the 1980s, my introduction to Ukrainian nationalism was through the Ronald Reagan presidency. There was the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists here in the U.S.
Great guys. No,
were wonderful people. Were huge supporters of Reagan, and so I became interested in that. And I had a blog at the time, which was really a parody, and not funny all the time, but a parody. And I kind of focused on this. I began to focus on Ukraine and their nationalists here, and at the time, Yanukovych was being overthrown for the first time in 2004. That was in the air, and I used to write that up, and I say, "Look, you're making a big mistake. If you go with Soros and the West, you people are going to get fucked big time." And they weren't the poorest country in Eastern Europe at that time. But soon after that, with the first color revolution, in which swept away Yanukovych, they became, like almost overnight, the poorest country in Eastern Europe. And so I saw I used to get my stats, and of course, most of my people reading it were from the United States, and Ukraine used to be like in the top 40, but like 30 and 39, it became number 2, because it was like, what did this guy know that we didn't know? Well, because that's how good the propaganda was. So I don't know how you get over that. I mean, the whole country just got bled dry overnight by believing the bullshit.
Isn't Zelensky currently just privatizing all the industries and things right now in Ukraine? I mean, of what's left of Ukraine, he's trying to cash out and just give everything to the Western oligarchs.
That's the only play he has, I think, at this time. But didn't he open, and this was recently, maybe a couple of weeks, he opened the New York Stock Exchange with a bell, well, virtually. Didn't he do that? That's like, and he said so. Ukraine is ready for business, meaning buy whatever you want. This is all yours. It's so ridiculous that until I think 2019, there's this very fertile black topsoil in Ukraine called Chermozem. That is the future of a country. Until 2019, you couldn't export it. From 2019 on, it was on the export markets. That black topsoil, which is extremely fertile, that was something that it really breaks me, because when I look at Ukraine, I look at their buildings. I know people who live in those buildings in Hungary. We should be brothers. But what this whole thing, the first time I remember, before February, I saw the first Totenkopfs or swastika or the first little SS brigade tattoo on one of those gentlemen who like to call for taxis in that particular way. I said, no, I already know which side I'm on. My grandfather would never allow me to be in any kind of support of this sort of thing. So anybody who says Slava Ukraini, Geroyam Slava, which are two words from the OUN booklet from 1943, of which Bandera was an absolute part of, who was plastered over what looks like the Kievan Times Square before the conflict erupted with the signs, Ukraine is mother, Bandera is father. That ideology and all of his descendants, that just has to go. And if Ukraine is over, if that spills over to places like Poland and the Baltic states, don't they know they're in for the same horrid future? They really should count right now. And I'm just going to end a little bit here on Poland because, you know, there are brothers culturally, a lot of Polish friends that we get along with absolutely fine, but their government is not just ready for war, but like they're aching for it. They were like, let's just go. We should go in there. I don't know. I think they can't. They think the American aircraft carriers, all those B-2 bombers, they just come in to save them. And there's no historic reason to believe them. They would be, you know, like those poor people in Iraq trying to get to the last airplane in Kabul. Hey, we did what you asked. What are you going to do? Leave us here? Yeah. And Ukraine is going to learn the exact same lesson, I think, not far from now.
So, Ben, tell us again where we can donate to you.
Thank you. That's kind of you. I'm on both Patreon, if you can afford a regular payment, or if you could just give me 1 or 2 coffees, then I'm on Buy Me a Coffee. Both URLs are followed / Bentoth, my name, but without the funny, you know, O letter, single word.
Well, thanks for joining us on the program today. And we just have a couple more minutes, and I'm going to go ahead and close up. This has been the Foreign Policy Review, an excellent discussion, Hungarian perspective of the EU and NATO. So go back and watch if you missed. If you're watching now, please subscribe to the channel there, New York Parrot, and join us some of our other programming from the New York Parrot. We'd love to have you guys watch things like Financial Focus University, as well as the politics and other programs that we offer. So please do watch us. And with further ado, go out there and do some research, some reading. America Open Market, AO Market. The best digital market for humanity is a free, multilingual, borderless market open to international sellers with various languages included. With America Open Market, you may start selling in minutes after filling out the form. Comprehensive dashboard where you understand your sales, orders, and customers is available. You get paid directly, securely, and instantly on the America Open Market. You can sell your house, car, electronic laptop, CD player,